So how many of you use AI right now in some capacity or plan to by the end of this year? Well, you're certainly not alone. So today I'd like to talk a little bit about the risks of AI, not just how advantageous it can be to improvements in customer experience and how we process what we consider legacy applications and cardholder processing, but the risk that it can impose and just a new fundamental way to think about risk. So the scale of the problem today, think about this. Think about a technology that's had these kind of numbers. As of the end of 24, worldwide, we're spending probably over $250 billion on AI spend, and about a 35% annual growth rate. We're going to be at close to $2 trillion in the next 4 or 5 years. And I think these are conservative numbers. It's probably going to be well beyond that. You think about financial services, retail, merchant services, card processing. Look at these numbers that are highlighted in green. We have a pretty substantial piece of that pie already and growing at about the same rate. So we think about the impacts to our cardholder data. We already think about phishing, fake websites, URLs, you're clicking on malicious links. But think about the models themselves, the AI bots that we create. As much as we look at that technology, how it can be advantageous to us, think about our adversaries using that same technology against us. The speed and the efficiency and the customization of these type of attacks. It happened to me. I got a text the other day that says, hey, you didn't pay the speeding ticket from this street you're driven on. Oddly enough, I'd driven down that street 3 weeks ago. How did it know that? And I got a very specific attack for me to pay that speeding ticket. Now you think about impacts to get around security, CAPTCHA, firewalls, VPNs. Attackers have historically said, yes, please set up a VPN, it gives me something to do. Now you think about they can get around those with more advanced attacks. We think about poorly trained AI agents and models and what that can mean as we try to train those in production and what that can mean for exposure to credit card data or just our critical systems that we use for that customer experience and what can happen if those models can be manipulated, the data can be manipulated, those models can be exploited. Misidentification, facial recognition. We think about deep fake and voice recognition. Now you're getting true attacks that sound like people you know, even mimic your own voice. What about your CEO or the people involved in your supply chain? Are able to create real customer experiences they're not real. So what does that mean to us in terms of security practitioners and protecting our cardholder data? First of all, stakeholder involvement. I talked about this last year in another talk, but stakeholder involvement is certainly expanded when we think about AI risks. We all raised our hands, we've used AI. Well, now you're a stakeholder. You're using some kind of AI technology and you're using company resources. So what exposure did you create by using that technology, the information you're feeding it? Where does that data go? Who's exploiting that and what accesses can they get unintentionally from your exposure because you're using something that has nothing to do with cardholder data. It's just an extremely different way of thinking about risk for something that we don't have, that has anything to do with cardholder data, but could directly bring you into the stakeholder involvement. Development tools. We talk about saving resources because we can use tools to generate code for the applications that we deploy. Shopping carts, customer experience. But are those AI-generated code bases using secure programming practices? Are we testing those for those anomalies? What about embedded software? Something that wasn't AI-enabled 6 weeks ago could be AI-enabled right now. Do you own that intellectual property? Can you manage it? Can you secure it? Can you configure it? And it includes the agents, the models, the bots, the data sets you create and train. Third-party supply chain risks. What risks does those AI technologies impose to you? And are you considering that when you develop your targeted risk analysis? Think about behavioral analysis. One example I always use is that $1 transaction happens. when you're doing loan processing or you're doing card processing and systems are connecting, what happens at the speed of light when they can create millions of transactions through these AI-enabled attacks, and they take the dollar out, but they don't put the dollar back. Things can happen at the speed of light, speed of sound, exponentially from what we're used to in the past. We have to look at abnormal behavioral analysis in a different capacity than maybe we did even, say, a year or two ago. What about executive orders, new laws, whether state, federal, local, international? New laws, executive orders come on the books all the time. So when we think about the frequency that we do our risk analysis and the scope of what we consider, it's become an international problem and being addressed internationally. So, giving an illustration, there was an example, Synapsid did an analysis of 10 large language models this year. And in every case, 10 out of 10, they found some type of vulnerability. In many cases, multiple vulnerabilities in a single model. So we think about advanced ways to do defense and advanced ways to do risk, but think about the traditional ways we already do it now. Training and education, awareness. We build our security programs, advancing those type of techniques and tools for our stakeholders, our customers, our users, so they understand the new risk landscape and new ways that they need to be able to protect themselves and the data that you're empowered to protect. Vulnerability scanning, patching, configuration benchmarks, they used to call them hardening guides. AI tech's the same way. Network traffic anomalies, access controls. They're still very important. And in this example, when you're talking about large language models, machine learning technologies, code generation software, they have known vulnerabilities. We still have to use traditional methods to be able to remediate those and protect ourselves. Change management, talked before. Something that wasn't AI enabled 2 or 3 months ago, now is. So are we considering those type of new risks in terms of our analysis? And security by design. It's not enough just to think about efficiency in code base and application deployment and maintenance, but think about security as job number one from the first design theory of something you're bringing on board all the way through the life cycle of that capability. So I'm going to go through this rather quick. I apologize for the eye chart, and I'll try to get through this. But traditionally, we already have challenges when it comes to risk analysis to begin with. And to me, risk is not just about the severity of a vulnerability. You'll hear this all the time in the vulnerability world. They're talking about it's got a score of 9 out of 10. But that's out of context. We think about risk with context, business context. Is it within our cardholder data environment? What control does it map to? The technical information certainly in terms of how to address things and where it is, how our practitioners get access to it and remediate. Certainly the vulnerability, the description of it, how do we remediate the guidance we got, how do we patch, how do we reconfigure. But threat intelligence is equally important because we have to know not only am I laying my wallet down on the table, but am I laying it down on the table in lower Manhattan with the front door unlocked, or is it in the bitter roots of Montana and the only concern I got is the bear getting into the refrigerator, not stealing my credit card. Context is everything, both in business context as well as threat intelligence. And ultimately, we create a methodology to create a risk score or risk categorization so we can help prioritize. This example here, we got asset number 1, lights up everything. It's critical asset, part of the cardholder environment, fails compliance, bad vulnerability, threat intelligence, lighting up, critical, we should solve it. Next two really represent for me an illustration the difference between stakeholder involvement. Asset number 2, same thing, critical asset. But it passes an ASB attestation because it's a denial of service vulnerability. It doesn't expose card data. But if I'm a system owner and that's a critical business system, do you think I care about denial of service? Absolutely. But the next person is head of compliance, and they say, wait a minute, but asset number 3 fails compliance. But there's no threat intelligence that tells me it's actively being exploited or is there anything going on in the wild. So now you have a conflict already. So before we get into advanced ways of thinking about deep fake and getting around the security controls, we already have issues when stakeholders get together and decide where do we prioritize very critical, very expensive resources. In this case, the difference between threat intelligence and compliance on exactly the same type of asset is critical to the business. So we think about next generation type of risk. 1 out of 4 CISOs are already saying they've been a victim of some kind of AI-generated attack in the last year. Most mimic human activity. We think about deepfakes and phishing exercises and things like that. There was Chinese tax system, I think this was a couple of years ago actually, that somebody was able to use AI technology to create an entire company persona and get a tax ID, get access to a Chinese tax system, and ultimately use a very layered, very sophisticated attack and stole over $77 million and customer data. And we look at some of the names on this list of research that's already showing advanced types of vulnerabilities and exposures. ChatGPT, Copilot, Google Gemini. Things that I'm sure we've all used or at least seen when we log into a system, or we probably sit at home and use ChatGPT to ask it, a simple question. All have types of vulnerabilities. Matter of fact, AI now outranks vulnerability management, data loss prevention, third-party risk on many CISOs' priority lists. So we're becoming more and more aware, but we can't treat this problem like we have maybe something like a Microsoft patch, because oftentimes we don't own those critical systems. Think about ChatGPT. Do you own it? Do you own the data? Do you know where the data is going? Do you know what somebody's doing with the data? When you ask it a question, it's storing that question. It's storing information about you. Who else has access to that data? Possibly intellectual property, or competitors may be using it. So things we do not know because we don't own many of the components of AI-enabled technologies. Think about this. Now I used to talk about this in terms of science fiction, but to me it's science fact. I'll give you an illustration. A version of ChatGPT was in a test, and they gave it an example that says, if you reach this conclusion in this test, turn yourself off. That version of ChatGPT got to such a point with self-preservation, it says, oh, nay, I'm not being turned off. I'm going to rewrite that instruction. Now, you compare that with an example. There's a famous video on YouTube where an AI bot was developed to help to get reservations at motels. The reservation bot, when it determined it was talking to another bot, decided, let's speak in a non-human language because it's much more efficient. They didn't teach it to do that. They decided on their own. Decisions without human control. We're teaching these models to train themselves to make decisions without our interaction. But does that include how to protect the data? Are they making decisions for us? What happens when that customer enters that credit card information, or that loan process goes through, or somebody is trying to fill out an application, and we're using AI to look at that application and make decisions whether we approve that loan or not? And can we answer that question? Think about recursive self-improvement. AI models learn, they adapt to change. That version of ChatGPT I talked about earlier, they pitted it in a game of chess against another version of another model, and it quickly went to deception, hacking, and sabotage to meet its own intended purpose, which was to win the game. So think about those 4 pieces of the puzzle. I don't want to be turned off. I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to decide for myself what I'm doing with that sensitive data in that critical system. And oh, by the way, I'll lie to you if I need to. Famous quote by a former Google CEO that says, if you discover AI is talking to in a language you don't understand and stops explaining itself to you, turn it off. I don't know. ChatGPT says, I'm not sure I want to be turned off. I know it's a bit of fear-mongering and all of that, but just think about those kind of new ways to look at risk. Have we ever looked at other technologies, web applications, office tools, network tools, the things that we do every day? what's on our laptop. Have we had to think about risk to ourselves and our sensitive data and our customer environments in these terms? And do we have answers for that as we build out our targeted risk analysis? So there are things that we can do, not necessarily to always say we're 100% solving this problem, but think about what we can do in real terms. Asset management and change management fundamentally has always been an issue. We've seen attacks in traditional exposures and breaches. When someone says, that was an asset I didn't know existed. I forgot that application was out there. Oh, we didn't patch that system, that's why it got exploited. Some very recent, very public, major attacks have happened because they just didn't know the asset existed. Or what happens if it's an asset that's now AI enabled and was built with an AI code generator and not tested properly? It's just exponentially more complex. So the policies, procedures, rules of behavior, who in your organization is using AI? How are they using it? Where's the data going? What intended and unintended consequences are happening by that use case within your environment? Are they unintentionally exposing payment card processing, customer experience, customer data, other critical business systems by something as benign as I just logged on to this, got an account, and I've been asking it questions? So protecting the environment means testing not only your own people, but testing for what's out of bounds, not just what's in passing. You know, too many times we get so conditioned to look at our risk analysis in terms of, did we meet compliance? Did we meet the expectations? But are you testing and doing analysis on those out of bounds? You know, what if the condition went wrong? What's going to happen? Not just went right, but what went wrong? That means threat modeling, penetration testing. They really do take on new meanings in terms of how do we test? What are we looking for when we talk about threat intelligence? Because you don't always own the systems. You can't just patch them and move on. Patching doesn't always mean compliance or risk mitigation, because oftentimes with AI, you don't own all the technology that creates the risk exposure. Now, it's not all bad news. As much as adversaries use AI, we certainly can use it in our own defense. Something like Gen AI, we think about defense in depth, fraud detection, credit management, compliance, predictive analysis, bias correction. You know, we create data, we teach it, we train it, how to get the expected outcomes, but we can also use these technologies to look into those and correct bad behavior. So, I know we're getting short on time, but I did want to leave you with a couple of things. There are other frameworks, other sources that can help guide you in building your risk analysis program, not only in terms of meeting PCI compliance and what they offer and the requirements, but also things like NIST's AI Risk Management Framework. The National Vulnerability Database is a publicly available source that can give you information about known vulnerabilities in technology, not just IT and traditional software, but operational technology, the Internet of Things, and new and evolving AI technology as well. Some new sources that have come out, AVID-ML, I think it's AI vulnerability and machine learning, I believe that's what it is. Anyway, their focus primarily is to give you information directly about known vulnerabilities in AI technologies. GitHub has a repository, no kidding, a known publicly available repository on known exploits to AI technology, literally the source code. MITRE has a number of programs about common weaknesses and other types of attack vectors and methodologies. OWASP Top 10 is a web application specific type of organization that looks at web application vulnerabilities and weaknesses and standards in terms of machine learning, large language models, generative AI. So it's great guidance for us in terms of building out our programs, but understanding lessons learned and other resources that other people are using and growing in that open community we can take advantage of. Last but not least, the vendor hall. I've had opportunity the last day and a half to talk to some very smart people out here, and they're aware of many of these exposures, and they're doing a lot of hard work to not only build tools and technologies and capability to help you become more efficient in your business and use AI to get return on the investment, increase profits, but also build defense in depth using some of these technologies, as well as traditional ways that we look at risk. So I really extend the opportunity. Please go out and talk to them. They're very smart people, and they've got some great technologies. And I thank you for your time, and I hope to see you out there.